Okay, so the Trump administration has just made a huge move, a really massive shift in American foreign policy. We're talking about an order to pull out of dozens of international organizations. And in this explainer, we're going to break down exactly what's happening. And, it really all boils down to one single number: 66. That's right. That is the number of international bodies the United States is now set to exit. It's a pretty staggering move, and it was all set in motion by a single presidential directive. So let's get into the weeds a bit. What did this order actually say? What are the mechanics of this whole announcement? Well, the heart of this whole thing is a presidential memorandum, and you got to think of this as more than just a press release. It's a direct command to every single government agency to start cutting ties, and crucially, cutting funding to all 66 of these organizations. And this isn't some targeted strike against just one type of group. The list is pretty much split right down the middle between organizations that are affiliated with the UN and those that aren't. We are talking about groups that cover everything from climate and international development all the way to gender policy. It's a really broad sweep. So the big question is why? What's the official reasoning for a move this dramatic? Well, the administration has been pretty clear about its case. Yeah, Secretary of State Marco Rubio really did not mince words here. This quote just lays it all out. It reveals the core belief that's driving this whole decision, that these groups aren't just ineffective, but that they are, in his words, actively anti-American. And the reasoning gets even more specific. The administration's review apparently concluded that these organizations were failing on multiple fronts. Some were seen as just redundant or a waste of money. Others were described as being captured by foreign interests. And some were even labeled as a direct threat to U.S. sovereignty. And, of course, a huge part of this argument comes down to money. It's a cornerstone of the whole rationale. The message here is simple. American taxpayer dollars shouldn't be going to foreign institutions that, in their view, don't directly help the American people. So, who are the main people driving this policy? The announcement really highlights two central figures, and they each have very distinct roles in this process. You can kind of think of it as a two-step process. Secretary Rubio's State Department, they did the homework, right? They ran the review, they came up with the findings, but it was President Trump who made the final call, signing that memorandum that gives this whole thing the force of law. So how in the world do you actually pull a country out of 66 organizations all at once? It's definitely not as simple as just, not showing up to the meetings anymore. There's a formal process for this. Okay, so it all started with a review that was actually ordered under a previous executive order, one designed specifically to evaluate these kinds of memberships. The findings from that review led directly to the president's memorandum, and now that memo is basically the green light for all government agencies to start the official process of pulling out. But here's a really key legal detail, especially when it comes to those UN-affiliated groups. The order specifies that withdrawal has to happen to the extent permitted by law. And that little phrase is important because it acknowledges that untangling the U.S. from UN treaties and binding agreements can be a really complex legal mess. All right, let's zoom out for a second and look at the bigger picture. How does this action fit into the administration's larger policy goals? Because this isn't just an isolated event, it's absolutely part of a much broader, clearly stated agenda. And, no surprise here, this is all being framed as a central part of the America First agenda. The goals are pretty straightforward. Restore U.S. sovereignty and stop sending taxpayer money to organizations that are seen as wasteful. It's basically reevaluating every single international commitment through a strict cost-benefit lens for the American taxpayer. And listen to this. This might just be the first wave. The White House have already confirmed that the review process is still going, which means this list of 66 organizations, it could actually get even longer. This quote from Secretary Rubio really sums up the entire new philosophy perfectly. It's a completely transactional approach to foreign policy. The U.S. will cooperate when it directly serves American interests, and it will stand firm or just walk away when it doesn't. So the biggest takeaway here is that this is so much more than just leaving a few committees. It signals a fundamental shift in how America sees its place in the world. And it leaves all of us with a really huge question. As the U.S. steps back from these 66 organizations, who or what is going to step forward to fill that void?